This is Stephanie Francisco. I'm Communications Director at Conservation Alabama, and we're back with another Conservation Q&A video chat. And today we have the Executive Director of Alabama Audubon, Dr. Ansel Payne. So Ansel, thank you so much for joining us.
Stephanie, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, so can you tell us a little bit about, if folks aren't familiar with Alabama Audubon's work, what is it that you all do?
Sure. So we like to say that we're Alabama's leading conservation organization that works on behalf of birds and the people who love them. So we work all around the state, both doing real conservation work to try to protect bird habitat and to protect birds. We do scientific research, and we also help connect people with nature. So that could be everything from leading a field trip with seasoned bird watchers to helping to teach people the names of the birds that are at their feeders in their backyard.
That's great. And I have to say, this video is a little selfish on my part because mostly these are just questions I personally wanted to know the answers to about birds, because I think I, like probably many people who are lucky enough to be at home right now, I'm spending a lot more time staring at my windows, looking at birds. And luckily it's springtime, right? So we have a lot of birds to look at. And I guess if people are just getting started birding, what do you think is sort of the novice backyard birder thing that we need to know?
Oh man, I've been training my whole life for this question, Stephanie. I love it. So I think, one of the sad things about birding is that it can be really intimidating for people. If you go out on we've heard about people going out on field trips with Audubon groups sometimes, and they're like, oh, I didn't bring my really expensive binoculars, and I don't have the khaki pants or whatever. The truth is, you don't need any of that stuff. Birds are accessible to everybody. Pretty much anyone living anywhere can see a bird out their window as long as you have a window. I used to live in New York, and we would get all kinds of interesting birds that would come through. So I think one of the things that I suggest to people is don't try to learn all the different springtime warbler plumages at one time, right? Take it really easy and think about it as like an opportunity, especially right now, to practice some mindfulness. So if you're brand new to birding, you've never done it before, try this little exercise. You can go outside tomorrow morning and just stand there, try to count the different types of birds you see. So you don't need to name them, but just tell that they're different from one another. Try to identify those differences, and then maybe do the same thing with sound. So see how many different bird songs you can hear. And if you can tell those apart, just write them down, try to describe them. Maybe try to vocalize what it would sound like, if you could spell out what the bird song sounds like. You can do that. And then when you've done that for a couple days, pick one of those birds, get a bird guide, or go online to allaboutbirds.org, try to identify that one bird and make that one bird your special bird. And then when you know it really well, move on to another bird. And within a couple of years, you'll know every bird that's out there.
I mean, that sounds pretty easy.
Yeah.
I could do that.
Sometimes the thing about learning the different or hearing the different songs, that sounds easy, but when you get out there, you might be surprised at how many different birds there actually are. So it's fun it's a great way to spend your own time. It's also a really good activity for kids. And when we need to take our mind off things, it can be a really good way to do it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty useful right now. So if people are just getting started, I mean, do you need, is there a good book that we should get? Is there an app to download? Should we be keeping track of birds that we see that we feel like are our birds now?
There's a lot of things you can do. So if you have a bird guide, or if you want to go on Amazon and get one, there are lots of good classic bird guides. The Peterson's Guide to Birds is great. The Sibley's Guide to Birds, those are the two that I often go to. Some people like National Geographic Field Guide to Birds of Eastern North America. But there's also really good online resources and their apps. So the Audubon app is a very good one. If you go to Cornell's allaboutbirds.org website, that's one that I really like. Let's see, there's also a pay-for app. I think it's like $20, but it's called iBird. I love that. So I tend to be kind of an old school paper and pencil sort of person, but those are good options. And then if you feel like you really know how to identify your birds, you can go to ebird.org, EBIRD.org, and you can find sightings there.
Cool. Now, what about feeders? I mean, are there, I have the feeder that you get at Home Depot, and I have the bird food that I buy at Publix. Should I be upgrading that kind of stuff to get more interesting or different birds?
Black oil sunflower seed tends to work really well for just about everything. one thing that I recommend to people is planting native plants. If you have a yard, you can plant, even just start with some basic things like wax myrtles or American beautyberry. That'll bring a whole different set of birds into your yard too. But anything that you're putting out for birds that's creating a little attractive patch will help them come to you so you can see them.
Cool. So it's springtime. We talked a little about, all kinds of birds are coming through. Are there migration patterns that are particularly interesting right now? Like who's making their way through Alabama right now that we're not going to see in a couple months?
Oh man, it seems like everybody is coming through. We're right in the middle of spring migration. A lot of warblers are coming through that we'll only see for a little while. Some of them moving up to breed further north. Some of them will be here for the summer. Chimney swifts have just come in. Green herons are coming into our parks. There are almost too many migrants right now to mention. Some of our winter birds, this is an interesting period because some of our winter birds are still around and some of our spring birds are coming in. So it's that rare opportunity that you can hear both a chimney swift in the sky overhead and cedar waxwings in a tree. So, and the fact that this has been probably one of the most beautiful springs on record, which is nice considering so many other things are so messed up this spring. It's nice to have some beautiful weather. It's been just a birder's paradise. I live in Avondale in Birmingham, and it's very much an urban neighborhood. But I can hear northern parulas calling. I can hear prairie warblers calling outside. Broad-winged hawks are a migratory hawk species that's just come back. I get all three of the major hawk species right here over my house. So anywhere that you are, you can see some great spring migrants.
Well, I'm glad you brought up chimney swifts because I know Alabama Audubon has a special chimney swift program that I've seen a little bit about because we live in Montgomery, and I think you've now got a new chimney swift tower at AUM's campus.
Yeah.
So tell me about that project.
Yeah, and chimney swifts are one of those things, if you see them in a book, you might think, who could ever fall in love with that boring little brown bird, right? Well, it turns out all of our staff have fallen in love with them. They're wonderful, really cool birds. So they're one of these spring migrants. They spend the winters down in Peru in very, very far remote headwaters of the Amazon River. So they're in as close to the middle of nowhere as you can be. And then when the spring comes, they fly up to Eastern North America, and they really like cities because they breed inside chimneys. So before there were any industrial chimneys or any man-made chimneys in the New World, these guys would have bred inside big hollow beech trees or any of these old forest trees with cavities on the inside. We don't have as many of those now, and we didn't have as many of those in the 18th and 19th centuries. But when people started building chimneys, the birds moved into the chimneys. So they're just fascinating on a lot of different levels. They're related to hummingbirds. They don't actually ever perch on a tree, and they never land on the ground. The only time they ever touch the earth is when they're inside a chimney. So that's the only thing they'll ever touch. They even drink water on the wings. So they'll fly down and get a drink of water and come right back up.
Amazing.
The problem is the population has decreased fairly significantly. I think it's something like 60% decrease over the last 40 or 50 years. And we think it's a combination of declines in insect populations that they eat, but also there just aren't as many places for them to nest because we don't have chimneys. So one of the things that Audubon does, we launched this program called Alabama Swift Watch. So anyone in the state can go online to alaudubon.org/swifts, and they can join the Swift Watch. It's basically a corps of volunteers who look for swifts in the sky overhead. And then we monitor places where they might be nesting, and we also look for their big roosts. So in the fall, when they move back south, they'll look for really big chimneys, and they'll 1,000 of them will come in at once at night. So we monitor those roost sites as well. Really fun thing that you can do with your kids, and it's a good thing even if you live downtown and you can see chimneys. It's a thing you can do right now in your quarantine situation too.
Always good to have activities for kids right now.
That's right.
So you mentioned hummingbirds being related to chimney swifts, and I got crowdsourced some birding questions from my mother, who's a big birder who lives in Fairhope, and she was interested in hummingbirds migration patterns. And I just talked to her today, and she said she saw the first hummingbird that she's seen so far this year today. Does that sort of start, I guess, from the coast as they're coming back north?
Mm-hmm.
When do we see hummingbirds normally in the state?
Right about now. So they've been coming in for the last few weeks. Again, if you go to that ebird.org website, there's a function where you can explore other people's sightings. And that's really helpful to figure out the timing of when other people are seeing the birds come through. So I checked it for hummingbirds, and people have been seeing them pretty consistently for the last week or 2 weeks in the state. And that wave moves up from the coast. You know, hummingbirds are one of these trans-Gulf migrants, which means that those tiny little bodies, you know, about the size of your thumb, fly all the way from the Yucatan in Mexico across the Gulf of Mexico and land in Alabama, which is incredible, right? It's the equivalent of us like running an ultra marathon, drinking nothing but sugar water.
That's astonishing. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to keep our eyes open for the hummingbirds. And it's the best thing to do. I know we have the special hummingbird feeder, right? And can you just make your own sugar water for hummingbirds?
It's the, you know, this is one of those examples where homemade, it's a very Southern thing. Homemade is the best way to do it. A lot of the commercial hummingbird nectar that you buy has all these unnecessary food coloring and other additives. Really, the only thing that the birds are looking for is sugar and water. So you can find those recipes. I should have this memorized. Usually other people field the hummingbird questions, but I think it's 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. But that's widely available on the internet, or anyone can call Audubon and we can look it up and give them the right ratio. But that's the best thing that you can do. It doesn't need to be red. You have a feeder that has some red part on it, that'll do, but they'll also find, they'll just find it. So some of our hummingbird flowers, like Carolina jasmine, attract the birds, and they're yellow. So they don't need that red color.
Interesting. Okay, I have one more question that is completely self-indulgent, but I have been driven absolutely insane by birds late at night lately.
Yeah.
What is going on with those birds? Why are they up at all hours of the night?
Yeah, it's party season for birds.
They could really settle down a little bit for my taste. But what kind of birds are they, do you think?
Well, you know, a lot of things call now at all hours of the day. Probably the biggest offenders are the mockingbirds. So, you know, sometimes with birds, this is going to be a little bit of a didactic digression, but a lot of times when you see birds, the male will be really colorful and exotic. The female will be a little drab. So we call sexual selection. So we have traits that the females find really attractive. And so that drives evolution in that direction. So a classic example is that male cardinals are really red, female cardinals are not. Well, mockingbirds don't really have that, what we call a dimorphism. The male mockingbirds and the female mockingbirds look a lot alike. What female mockingbirds are looking for is a mockingbird who can sing, right? So they really want one that can do all kinds of crazy vocal gymnastics. The more songs they can do, the better. They kind of do their whole repertoire of impressions. So they'll do impressions of blue jays and red-shouldered hawks. So because singing is such a big part of their lives and their strategy for attracting females, they're going to get started as early as they can. And Stephanie, if you're like me, that can be 3 o'clock in the morning, that can be 2:30 in the morning when we start to hear them. So the short answer to your question is pretty much all of our breeding birds right now are in hormonal overdrive. So they're like middle schoolers right now. And the only thing they're thinking about is how to like get a girlfriend. And if that means you got to get up at 2:30 in the morning to sing your song, you're going to get up at 2:30.
So I just kind of, like a parent of a teenager, I just have to like ride this out and wait for it to end.
That's right. It'll get better as the summer goes on. You know, you can't really call the cops on them. So I guess they're
too bad. Yes.
Right, the noise ordinance, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so if folks are interested in learning more about Alabama Audubon, that's alaudubon.org, right?
That's right.
And I'm guessing probably as hopefully life goes back to normal, y'all will be back in the mix with volunteer opportunities and birding trips and the whole 9 yards. Yeah,
normally, you know, when we're not in a public health crisis like this, we offer field trips, at least 2 every month. We do urban field trips during the workday in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham. We're going to increasingly offer those in the Gulf Coast. We have volunteer opportunities for people who want to help with community science projects, and we have very popular classes. Obviously, all of that has been canceled for the time being. Our scientific staff are still working when they can do so safely alone. But one exciting thing I want to share, Stephanie, is that we've made the leap into online classes. So,
great.
So our first online class is a very simple 30 to 45 minute intro to birding. So if you're one of those people for whom this is all a new thing, that's tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Depends on when you run this, of course, Stephanie, but we'll have a rotating list of classes that are available on our website. Sign up, you can zoom in, you can ask the instructor questions, and you can learn all kinds of things about birds.
That's great. So if I want to share a link to that same thing, just the alaudubon.org, and we can get people registered for the class or make sure they have that info.
That's right. It'll all be up there, alaudubon.org/courses. We'll get you right to that page. And of course, you know, I wouldn't be a good executive director if I didn't pitch the fact that people can also donate to support Alabama Audubon at alaudubon.org/give.
Well, Ansel, thank you so much. That you have answered all of my questions. I've learned a lot. And I am going to do your birding class tomorrow, I think, for sure. So
I love it. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to Conservation Alabama for all the great work you guys do.
We appreciate it.